righty, what's up, Ashlynn? So, quick introduction here is I'm here with, of course, my friend Garrett, per usual, and we have the great Ashlynn Richardson here. Ashlynn is an IFBB pro, or bodybuilder. Ashlynn and I are really good friends. We met whenever I was doing my undergrad and my master's. Well, met whenever I was doing my master's at Texas Tech out in Lubbock, Texas. And we just became really good friends and have kept in contact via, various methods, whether that be, social media and things like that. And so, or you've kind of agreed to come and speak with us on several different things today. I think, honestly, this conversation could go for many hours if it absolutely needed to. Yeah. So I won't take any more of your light. So Ashlynn, go ahead. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do, your experience with bodybuilding, how long you've been doing it, just kind of an overall compilation of what your bodybuilding history looks like.
Yeah. So, I'm a professional women's physique competitor. I started competing back in 2016. I did women's figure to start off. I did my first two in women's figure and decided I tried to do division. And back then, 5 years ago, women's physique with Daniel and Bailey, and you had, who else am I trying to think of? Danny Reardon, like all of those women's physique competitors, they were fantastic. They had great shape, great structure. So I went for it. And I competed every year for 5 years straight. In 2018, got my pro card in women's physique at USA's in Vegas. And I was not prepared for any of that experience. It was my first national show. So wasn't really even expecting to qualify or get a placing, and then came out with an overall. Yeah. So that was a fun time. And then after that, it just kind of took off. I was really, really hungry for, competing and wanting to get on stage and make a name for myself, and had a great run with it. And then last year realized there was a lot going wrong with the division, and very quickly. And it was just a matter of health, mental, physical. I just needed to get out of it. And I still love competing. Don't get me wrong. I probably will compete, just not in women's physique ever again. Yeah,
for sure. No. And I you said quite a few interesting things there. Gosh, where bodybuilding has come since you started. That's interesting. It didn't even dawn on me that it was 2018 that you got your pro card, and that we are that far in the future now from that point. And gosh, what has gone on with you since 2018, like you said, with that experience. And so before we started doing kind of the formal stuff, you were discussing, like you said, where bodybuilding is and the direction that you think it's going, and you think that it may not be going in a good direction. Can you kind of explain where do you think bodybuilding is, I guess, in that regard right now? What do you think about it?
Well, sport is a very, very money hungry sport. Just like any other sport, but the problem is it's getting to a line where you're playing with a lot of physiology, and you're playing with people's health. Recently, especially within the last year, I can think of about 5 or 6 professional bodybuilders, and even amateur ones ranging from the ages of 23 to 50s that have just dropped dead due to heart conditions, health issues, brain issues, hormonal issues. And it's because the league itself is allowing the extreme to be pressed so hard, because they want the freakier looks. They want the freakier conditioning, the bigger size, the leanness. They want it all to the next level, because that's what's going to draw the crowd. Well, the problem is the human body can realistically only take so much of that. And people are jeopardizing their literal lives for the sake of a sport, for the sake of a plastic trophy, and to go home and say, look, I won an overall. And then, you realize several years down the line that you've completely jeopardized your own health for the sake of a trophy.
Yeah. And, Garrett, you may be able to speak on this. It seemed like at one point maybe that they tried to get away from the freakier looks with trying to do something more with like the classic physiques. And maybe I believe that they got rid of like women's bodybuilding, right?
Women's body now back.
Yeah, they just brought that back.
Right.
And
So
which it's totally interesting. Yeah. But I do like how whenever they did introduce, men's physique, class physique, kind of maybe bringing things back away from the just the giants, just the absolute freaks of nature. But yes, everybody still shows up to see, especially like at the big stages, the Olympia stages, Arnold, things like that.
Oh yeah.
They show up for the open division, to see those big monsters.
You look at like the monetary value. I mean, this is one thing that has been brought up quite regularly now as an IFBB pro. You have the men's open division at the Olympia. They win $675,000 for that first place. That much money for one person. Women's physique first place is 40 grand.
Yeah.
You get smaller divisions, like there's a women's bodybuilding, I want to say is like not even 25 grand. But because they're putting such a big emphasis on the mass monsters and that incredible size and that incredible leanness and conditioning, it's making a lot of people suffer, a lot of people. And from what the divisions used to be 5 years ago, even down to relative size and conditioning, it wouldn't even make a pro cut now. Like the Olympians back then would not even make a first call out this year at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, even when I think personally, if I were to put my opinion on it, you have the effort to do something like classic physique, which would be to take away from the mass monsters. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get to the extremes of that individual category. And so even though you have somebody trying to, or it appears that this institution is trying to make changes, the competitive nature of human beings are going to try and push it to the same extent, but try and maybe manipulate the body even more so physiologically so that they can maintain certain figure that maybe they shouldn't be having, or that maybe they aren't able to possess otherwise.
Yeah. And that's the other issue, is because you have so many people coming up in this sport and so many companies coming up in this sport. You have these athletes that are given contracts to represent these supplement companies or these clothing companies or whatever else. And in those subcontracts, you'll actually see laws or little pin notes written in there where they're meant to maintain a certain level of conditioning all year round. They're meant to compete a certain amount of times all year round. And I mean, back in the day, the reason we weren't having as many of the health issues and deaths like we are now is because they would do a show and they would take 3 months off from the gym. They would take 3 months off from dieting and exclusive training and actually give their bodies that recovery time. But now we're caught in the light of the Instagram highlight reels, and what everyone expects us to look like and wants us to look like is jeopardizing our health.
Along with that, so you have the stipulations of maintaining a certain degree of conditioning in those contracts. With the kind of rise in social media prevalence in bodybuilding and needing to maintain that conditioning, is there a level of exposure that the company wants you to give them, I guess, from your side? So do you need to do a certain amount of posts per day and things like that? Yeah.
I mean, you're deemed a certain amount of posts, what you say in those posts, how you even like hashtag those posts. I mean, there's all stipulations that go into play of what you're supposed to do as an athlete. Or you don't get the compensation, you're not getting those first places, you're not getting the trophies or the limelight. And that's what a lot of the sport has come to, I think, is just the limelight.
Right. So then along with that, and so as we were talking about how much money you'd have between males and female or bodybuilders, that the take home winnings for coming in overall. So it seems, let's say for male or the male division, that there's a lot of compensation, right, to be made for performing that well. Like you make quite a bit of money relative to what the female athletes would be making. So it seems to me that they're leveraging maybe the female athletes' just desire to compete, right, against them, right? And so you seem to have maybe some more passion of all of that. But then I guess I would ask you, do you think that it's passion driving the sport, or do you think maybe it's attention? Because it's obviously not money, right? What's driving female inclusion in the sport?
A lot of it, from at least the women's physique aspect that I've seen, is just passion, and it's a love for wanting to compete. Because I can tell you as a competitor, like not once have I gotten on a pro stage being like, oh, if I win, like I'm going to get a $6,000 check. Like, no, because in the grand scheme of things with competing, I've spent way more than $6,000 on supplements, food, travel. I mean, the whole nine. So $6,000 is just a blimp, but it's because that's one step closer to my goal of possibly getting on an Olympia stage. And that's what it comes down to for the women's aspect, I believe. You will have some women here and there that will make the front be like, oh, this is the comparison for men's bodybuilding as to what women's physique makes at the Olympia. I mean, some do make that stink. And some do it strictly just for the obsession of the attention.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be. Oh, go ahead, Garrett. Yes.
No, you're good. I was just kind of thinking about like, I know how lucrative some of the sponsorships can be for with supplement companies, things like that for male athletes, and so that I know that's what kind of drives a lot of them to be pushing themselves like they are, because they know that, okay, I can make this X amount of money from both competing and if I were able to pick up a sponsorship from blank, whoever it is. And I just wanted just to know if that same kind of lucrative opportunity is there for females, because I've talked to guys, I know what what kind of perks they get and things like that. So I just want to see what your perspective is on how that looks for females.
For the female aspect, and I truly believe it depends on your division, because whenever they're trying to add the female aspect to that side of the competing, they're looking at the more, for lack of better terms, sexualized divisions. When you look at figure, physique, or bodybuilding in the women's aspect of a league, you're not looking at any way, shape, or thought of a sexualized idea. However, I've heard bikini as being referred to as sex on a stick. You have newer divisions now coming out, and I mean, to be honest, a lot of them, sex sells in the industry as fitness goes too. I mean, you're going to have those girls putting on skimpy bikinis, holding a bottle of Bang Energy.
Well, so then is it going in the female regard as far as opportunities to kind of make it a livelihood? Is it getting away from bodybuilding and going more towards this fitness model?
Yeah, for the most part, it is. They're saying get out of it, and competing adds that aspect of attention that the supplement companies want. So it gives them that advantage and that edge. But a lot of them is like, oh, okay, I've got this sponsorship I can look at now. I've got this modeling opportunity I can look at now. Not an actual like, oh, they want to do like a contract. Like a lot of males get contract wins. So rather than like, oh, you get a photo shoot, which is what they do for females, they'll be like, we'll match your prize money in your competitions.
Gotcha.
Right.
So
that's crazy to hear that kind of disparity between the men's and women's sponsorships, things like that, and then just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It seems to me that the opportunity there are a lot of opportunities there for male athletes to be able to get sponsorship dollars, competing winning dollars, right? Where it almost for females, you would imagine that once you've created a name for yourself, the next route would be that you'd have to use your name and your presence to almost start your own business and do your own thing, right? And that would be the one way that you could actually have some sort of gain from it. But otherwise, if you're not capable of doing that, it almost seems like you probably come out in the red. I guess at least from a monetary perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you're more to get these opportunities, but you're not really making anything off of the opportunities.
Yeah. And what's the length of those opportunities? Let's say you were to get one as a female competitor, right? How long do they usually hold on to you for?
And generally the contract is just for a year, and they'll evaluate it based on different things like social media presence, sales even, because they'll give you obviously like the coupon codes or the discount codes that people can type in, and they will keep record of how many your sales and how many people are coming based on your profile clicks to buy stuff from their company. So they track all of it.
Go ahead, Garrett.
No, I was going to say, so this I know this has been going on ever since the fitness has started transitioning into social media several years ago. I don't know, maybe like 2015, 2016 is when it really started ramping up.
The original Paige Hathaway eras.
Maybe even before that. So when did, basically, you talked about kind of the direction that bodybuilding is going, and kind of the direction maybe specifically the women's categories are going, and we've even seen men's as well with kind of seeing how this is progressing, seeing how the health changes, things like that. Do you think there's any kind of correlation between kind of this new social media age and the direction that
Yes,
bodybuilding is going?
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's just, it's a addiction that screams, we want more on every aspect of the scale, whether it's a
Right.
size thing. It doesn't matter that everyone wants to see more. If someone's coming in at 2% body fat, they want to see someone at freaking 0.5% body fat and probably dead on stage. Like that's honestly some of the extremes they're willing to take it to. And, you know, there have been, I want to say 4 cases just this year alone of people in their late 30s and early 40s, competitors that have dropped dead the day before their show. Just dropped with heart issues, heart attacks, pulmonary embolisms. And it's asinine. It's, to me, it's completely asinine, because although I love bodybuilding and I do anything for competing, there comes a line to doing anything and doing everything, because I don't want to be, you know, wheeled out of my show or, you know, wheeled out of the tractor.
It's crazy to me, like the huge disparity between like bodybuilding and other sports. So people who commit and give the amount of time that they do, like bodybuilders do to their sport. So like any baseball or football players, you know, there's just not this same, you know, they commit their entire lives, all, you know, 24 hours a day to being as good as they can at their sport, right? They're not dropping dead. There's none of that going on, you know. But there is in bodybuilding, people giving all their time, all their effort, and also just not getting the same in return as far as
the attention, the fame, and all of it. Yeah. Especially when you start to look like football players, basketball players. But I feel like with bodybuilding, it is one unhealthiest fitness sports around. It's so, there's so much physiology that goes into it, and so much play on sodium levels, water levels, estrogen levels, test levels. I mean, they put so much emphasis on manipulating every aspect of your body that you throw 1 grain of sand in the wrench and it's all just going to go to crap, to be honest with you. That's where a lot of the issues are, is that you have coaches that aren't paying attention or aren't as knowledgeable as they should be to be giving these protocols. You know, I've actually have a friend of mine. She's a women's physique pro. She is still getting monthly dialysis and still has to get blood work done. Her coach had her go roughly 36 hours, I want to say, without water before her show, pressing diuretics, pressing clenbuterol, pressing heavy supplements without water. And she went into rhabdo the day of her show, literally the day of her show.
Yeah, that's crazy. I actually just had this conversation, just a brief conversation with someone the other day, kind of discussing just overall, you know, let's say just regular steroid use with bodybuilders. And, you know, kind of something that I had said along those lines was, you know, that's kind of the foundation, but we're not even talking about all the diuretics that are being used, all the things that you need to use in order to, you know, stop the side effects, the T3, the clenbuterols, the ephedra, the bronchades, you know, the lengths that people are willing to go to manipulate, like you said, every aspect, you know, of their physique. And like you said, again, you know, small degrees of change, or I guess, very small degrees of, yeah, there you go. Has such a cascade of negative effects that, like you said, or leads to somebody like your friend going into rhabdo and then still needing to be on dialysis. So along those lines, I would ask you a couple things, and I think that are really important. Is the first thing is, how much conscious awareness do you think that bodybuilders or bodybuilding athletes have of what they're actually doing to their figure? Do you think they know? Do you think they're just taking the information given to them, or do you think that they're choosing to ignore it for, I guess, the glory of winning and the attention potentially?
I think it's a mixture of both. Because I know, like with my friend, she very well knew that going without water for 36 hours and pushing all of those diuretics and all of those fat burners was going to be hell. It would have been. And she knew that, but because she's one of those that is an extremist by all sorts of the means, she did exactly what I told her to do. And this is a very, very well-known women's coach who has sent women's athletes to the Olympia, and she's one that he ended up putting in the hospital. And this coach has also had a woman die on him the day before her show at 43 years old because of such diuretic and PED usage. There's a lot that goes into it. People, one, not knowing. There is kind of that blind ignorance is bliss, I guess is what you would say, because you look great. And so of course you feel great because you're getting all this outside attention, you're getting all this response. I'm sure your workouts feel great because you're taking PEDs. But physically along the realms, you can't keep doing it and you're going to fall apart. And a lot of people, like myself, I even did this. You push it to extremes thinking that, oh, no, like I'll be just fine. And then 5 years later, you're not just fine. You actually have blood work done and a lot of tests done.
Right. So what I've seen too is a lot of athletes, especially ones that are maybe getting a little newer to the scene, especially competing at a high level. They're fresh competing at a high level, kind of have a lot of blind faith in what their coach is telling them to do. Right. And so they're doing it because their coach is telling them to do it, and they just don't know otherwise. And so that just puts a huge emphasis on how important it is to be a responsible coach of your athletes and to be a responsible consumer of responsible with what you are giving them and telling them to do, and to be educated yourself on what you're telling them to do. And I think that's just it's hard to find. I think the percentage of number of good coaches is going down. I think the waters are getting very muddied. There's an influx of people who are coaching and just absolutely should not be. And so the really good ones are now getting harder to find, or even saying now, like, I don't even want to be a part of this anymore, And so it's being even harder for people to find good coaches who know what they're doing and they actually put their trust in. And identifying a good and bad coach is becoming extremely difficult for people.
Oh yeah, not even like on the scale of bodybuilding, because I have friends they just want basic lifestyle coaching. Well, I have a friend who has Hashimoto's, and if you don't know what Hashimoto's is and how to deal with that and diet for it effectively, you will gain a lot of weight, and that's exactly what happened to her. So she shows me the diet that she was given by a certain bodybuilder coach, and I wanted to laugh, but also I was very mad, because had she explained, Brianna had told her that she had Hashimoto's, but had she, gone into further detail about that, I feel like she would have known that coach had no idea what she was talking about, because you have a lot of people that are putting their life on the line at the sake of their coach too. And that's these coaches are like, yeah, I could handle all these issues. And it's people that have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, people that have Hashimoto's, people that are hormonally dependent on like HRT or TRT, and they still don't have a clue at what they're doing, but they say they will for the sake of making a quick buck.
Right. Exactly. You don't want to put it like the responsibility on the athlete as the consumer of that product the coach is giving. But you need to, at the end of the day, right? You need to be responsible for your own health and things like that. And finding a coach that knows what they're doing, right? As hard as that might be, at the end of the day, the responsibility also falls on the coach. It's a good 50-50 split here. Responsibility on the coach as well. If you don't know what you're doing, or you have an athlete with some kind of other, like you said, type 2 diabetes, whatever it is, coming to you, and you're not equipped to handle that, you don't have the experience, don't have the education, whatever it is, then don't. Yeah, I think if that were to happen, one, we'd see a improvement in retention in the sport. People coming, because that's a huge issue right now too, is retention. People coming in, competing once or twice and saying, I hate this, because they're getting their experience ruined by a bad coach. And two, that'll increase their longevity, not just in the sport, but their lives as well.
Especially with coaching, like there's a very fine line in coaches that know what they're doing, and then coaches that are there to give you basic chicken and rice meals and say this is how you diet for a bodybuilding show and pray for the best. And unfortunately, I've run into some people that they don't want to do bodybuilding anymore. They don't even want to diet in a realm close to that because of bad coaching, or because a coach simple things like they need fast digesting carbs or slow digesting carbs, or they need certain fats because of gallbladder issues. And that's the other issue, is because there are so many people coming up in the sport so quickly. There's also an array of bad coaches, bad information, bad gear. I think that is also another issue that people fail to talk about. Just last year, actually, I had a friend of mine, women's physique competitor, was not a pro, wanted to be a pro very, very desperately, and ended up taking dirty gear and ended up getting a septic blood infection and died literally 2 days after coming out of the hospital, because they said that she was fine and, they'd cleared all. They even had a pick line, and ended up finding out it was because of dirty gear that she was taking. And that's very common as well, is you have a lot of people that end up on life altering conditions because they're also being given gear that was made in a bathtub with like food grade olive oil.
Yeah. And that's not even kind of the long-term effects of it. That's just something that can acutely happen to you as a part of the sport. I do have a kind of an interesting thing I want to ask, because Garrett, I know that you do coaching. Ashlynn, do you do any coaching still at all?
Yes.
Okay. So then I would imagine that you would have a couple things happening as far as identifying good coaches, or just like going on with the coaching part of bodybuilding and just physique sports, let's say, is that because of social media and the attention and the monetary value and gains that you can have from looking good and being a competitor, let's say, since that's going up, then you're going to drive up the market need for a coach, right? So coaches, or the need for a coach, whether it's a good or bad coach, would also go up, right? Or because our need is going up, the demand is, the supply is going to go up, and you're going to have degrees in which that supply is superior or inferior, right? So then it seems to me that that's one big issue, is that there's so much rapid growth and the need to look a particular way all the time that you're going to hire the coach in order to do that. But then it also brings me into the coaching perspective, where it's not okay to be a bad coach. But now it seems that you've gone from having, coaches training competitors to coaches competing to be the best coach.
That is true.
Right. And so that's why you would have, let's say, somebody, or in my opinion, that may be why somebody who's unequipped to handle certain things as a coach is still going to attempt to handle that particular instance, even though they're not well trained or well equipped, because they want to continue to feel superior, like they have, potentially that they may have the knowledge required to, handle that particular circumstance or that issue. And then you end up hurting people because they have this weird kind of superiority complex or inferiority complex, the need to basically be better than maybe they actually are. And then that's where you get some of the bad information going, right? Where you have to be the best coach and everybody else sucks. Right.
Oh yeah. It's the bro science. It's this didn't work for him, so he automatically thinks it's a bad technique and therefore cancels it out of any other sort of practice. Like, oh no, that doesn't work well just because it didn't work well for him, or it didn't work well with his last client. And that's another thing with coaching, is that everyone thinks that it's a cookie cutter basic bodybuilding meal plan. And it's by far, dieting for bodybuilding is probably one of the most mind-boggling experiences I've had as a client and as a coach, because everyone's body reacts so differently to simple things like fast digesting carbs and slow digesting carbs. My body reacts terribly to slow digesting carbs, but I have some clients, if I give them fast digesting carbs, will react how I react to slow digesting carbs. Same with different fat profiles. And one thing that I've noticed too with a lot of females is they're coming out having hormonal issues because their coaches just completely deplete all of their fats. And physiologically depleting all of your fats as a female is the worst game plan you can do. Worst.
It is interesting. I forgot that as we continue with the conversation, there's so many good points, but I don't want to stop all of our great conversation. But even with a male, we're doing some of our, some stuff in our lab right now. And I just had somebody come into my lab that I would consider to be a physique or a muscular physique athlete. And I don't believe they compete, but their look would obviously tell you that they, within a couple of years, that they could, or a year or two, that they could definitely.
They're genetically blessed.
Yeah. So they're performing well to the point that they're better than some of our other bodybuilders on our DEXA machines, right? So or somebody with that much muscle mass and that low body fat percentage, right? They came out on or below the 50th percentile for their bone mineral density as a man or as a male, right? Which is not something that we would generally see. Generally, if their individual is healthy, then they're going to be in the 100th percentile just because their resistance training is going to drive that bone mineral up. So then I was really curious on, well, yeah. So I was curious. I didn't ask this particularly, and I would only make assumptions right now, but it seemed to me that I was like, what's your diet like? Oh, well, just chicken and rice. And I'm like, okay, there's issue number one. It's like, that's pretty much all I eat all day, every day. I'm like, well, you may want to consider, right, adding in some other nutrients in there because your bone mineral is not where it should be for a 20-year-old kid. And then just based on your physique, and of course I didn't ask him this, but I would assume that this person was using gear. And that in order to offset the effects of the gear potentially, which maybe are contributed to his actual look, there could have been some AI use or aromatase inhibitor use, which would have kind of influenced the bone mineral density negatively.
Yeah.
And so, and somebody, and like I said, this person, this person's that young. I mean, this is a male. I can only imagine how that would have influenced, a female athlete.
Well, I mean, even just continuing on that path for 10 years, I mean, where's his bone structure going to be at to where it could support even, 10 to 15 more pounds of muscle?
Yeah. But I mean, even then, I can only think that if it's starting that early with I guess the misinformation on what it is they should be doing, like you said, what happens in 10 years if they continue to go down this road? It's not like, I mean, it honestly, in my opinion, it's just seems to be a weird desire to maintain a certain look without really realizing all of the different consequences that come, because there are so many consequences that even before we started, I had to re-up myself. I was like, okay, gosh, I know the basis of what, is going to happen to you, but there are so many subcategories of physiological impairments that you can have happen. So how about,
I've had, actually very heavily, because I mean, as with females, estrogen is our biggest hormonal compound. When you decrease that, you also start to decrease bone density, like you were talking about. You also increase other biological factors. For me, I actually, over the course of 5 years of taking PEDs and estrogen blockers and everything else, ended up pushing myself into chemical menopause. Mm-hmm. And they did tell me, unfortunately, that one of the factors I'll have to look at even at 26 years old now is things that women in their 50s have to worry about, like bone marrow bone density, tendon issues, ligament issues, joint issues. I mean, I've already got 2 herniated discs at the age of 26 that I'll have to get repaired within the next year due to, I'm assuming, is lack of estrogen and ruining my hormones and my physiological balance in my body due to PED and gears.
Yeah. So then how about this? I mean, so you said, that there are things that you have to deal with that, like you said, somebody who's postmenopausal would have to deal with, but at your current age, what kind of management do you have to do from this point on, I guess? So, like you said, you have these issues that you may be dealing with. What medications or conditions are you having to kind of manage from this point on, or are there any, or are you able to do it without, because you kind of stopped or cessated from that previous practice?
So I was given the option to do an HRT, so to speak, just to kind of help with the menopausal symptoms, because at this point, my anti-Murellin hormone is already at 0.2. So there's no coming back from that. I mean, once you get down a certain point below for AMH levels, you can't really reverse it. So he told me really just taking any sort of HRTs would just kind of prolong the menopause. It would negate the symptoms, but prolong it. So I completely just nixed all of that. I was like, you know what, we'll just let my body run its course at this point. And I've found, honestly, just supplementation as far as vitamins, more of the micronutrient scale seems to be helping a lot more than anything else did. And that even comes down to simple things like hot flashes and my bones hurting and my joints hurting, but definitely nothing as far as the lines of hormones go. I just refuse to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Refuse.
So then going down that, or what you said when you were going to let your body run its course and come off completely, what was that like?
So I actually completely stopped taking gear after Tampa last year, so last August. Mm-hmm. And for the first 9 months, it didn't feel like I had ever stopped taking gear. I still had incredibly high strength. I actually went and got blood work done, and my estrogen levels were at an 8. My estradiol was at an 8, and my test levels were at an 800. Yeah, which is extremely high for a female. And that was 9 months off of gear and estrogen blockers. So, I mean, at this point, my hormone profile is still pretty much the same, due to the fact that I did take Novadex at 20 mgs every day for 5 years. I completely crashed my estrogen production. There's nothing going on there. And I mean, for the most part, I feel like a lot of women are getting to that point in bodybuilding now because, you can just tell by the lack thereof in the fat and water retention. I mean, estrogen is going to make you hold on to some of that. And if you don't have any of that, well, you probably don't have any estrogen either. And a lot of women now that I've talked to that have been in the sport for as long as I have are having the very same issues I'm having.
Yeah, man, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess and that's the hormonal side is one side, and it's going to, things will differ between, males and females, and it's going in, like I said, that bad route. And I guess, we kind of discussed that it is progressed to that point. So there are a few things here. So you have all the different issues you're going to have. You're going to have issues with the heart, the cardiovascular system, right? You can have dyslipidemia, so bad or cholesterol from, I guess, overuse. What are you seeing as far as, maybe amounts, probably not a good word, but what are some of the actual practices that people are willing to do in order to get themselves to the ideal or physique? And then how does that differ? Let me see if I can rephrase this a little bit better. People are going to do crazy things in order to get to a particular look, right? Mm-hmm. What are they doing kind of on a daily basis to get to that look, as far as different hormonal therapies or just any sort of different strategies in order to get there? And then what are they doing leading up to a show? Some of the kind of crazier things that you've noticed that are becoming trends. And are they continuing to do those things? Kind of, I guess, how many shows are they doing? How often are they doing it throughout the year?
Right.
Just give us your kind of lowdown on that.
So from what I noticed, at least on the spectrum of women, is, for a male bodybuilder, it's not unheard of to have an off-season cycle where you're running low dose tests with some sort of bulking agent, and then you go into a show where you're running a lot of your hardening and drying agents. Mm-hmm. And for females, the way I was always thought or told it was supposed to be was, all right, you do your prep, you run very, very little, and then come the last 6 weeks, you throw in your hardening and your drying agents just so you get that final crisp look. Well, from my experience now, females are also running an off-season cycle and an on-season cycle all year round. That's not the way it used to ever be. Even with interviews with Corey Everson, huge women's bodybuilder back in the 70s and 80s, she would at most run estrogen blockers and Winnie her last week of competition. And her physique back then was fantastic. However, looking at her physique now to what women's physique is now, wouldn't even qualify for an NPC show. That's how extreme it's gotten. And now you have women pushing Winnie all year round. They're pushing Primo all year round. They're pushing T-ball, Anavar, whatever spectrum, anything pretty much a male has taken, I guarantee you a female has taken, because I know females that have taken Masteron, and I know females that have taken Tren even. And that's, yeah. And those are realms that you wouldn't have seen 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. And that even comes down to even microdosing Tren for peak weeks, and it's gotten extreme for women just to get a certain look.
Yeah. So I've got somewhere that I want to get with this. And so that's going on kind of in the sport. And I would say, and like I said, I'm definitely more ignorant to this than both of you, that seems to probably be going on those extremes in female classification. And the more extreme competitors themselves, but we had kind of identified that it's becoming more of a fitness kind of oriented field where you have more of the bikinis, like you said. What was it, sex on a stick? Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it's been compared to.
What does it look like there? Is it starting to manifest in that population as well, just to maintain those figures, and at what degree?
Yeah. I mean, I've even seen a couple like bikini competitors now taking anything of low dose FAR and estrogen blockers in their shows. And granted, bikini is nowhere near what it used to be, but they're coming up in size and they're coming up in conditioning and everything else. And from even the growth that it's taken in the last couple of years, you have more women that are just they're maintaining this look for so long, and they're completely crashing their health in the process without realizing it. So you'll have these fitness competitors and they'll come out and they'll be big for a year or two, and then out of nowhere they'll just disappear, and you'll find out it's because they've had to deal with all of these underlying health issues, or they've gone through and battled a lot of depression because they came off a bunch of gear, and then for the most part, from what I've seen, a lot of them don't get back on stage after that, or if they do, they're not anywhere near what they used to be.
Yeah, it's just crazy. People, the commitment there is just absolutely absurd. But we're seeing that trend now where, like in the bikini, in the figure categories, in the new wellness categories, there's increasing, that new trend, bigger in those in all those categories, right?
Yeah.
Same thing on the male side, right? Men's physique is starting to look like where classic physique was at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing this trend, and so like now within each of these categories, we're getting to almost like the max size that you can even be considered, even within, and to remain in these categories, and that's just pushing the upper end of like bodybuilding, men's and women's, even farther. These people that were just driving this ladder up and up and up, and do you think, I know my opinion too. Do you think there's a ceiling, and do you think we're getting close to it?
In my personal opinion, no. Mm-hmm. I feel like with this industry, this is one that is going to be ever evolving and ever changing. And, it's funny. I remember in 2016 getting critiqued, and I was natural in 2016. I got critiqued for a figure show being too lean because I had cross striations in my quads. And now you look at some of those figure girls on the Olympia stage, they're peeled. They have striations in their glutes. I mean, they have and this is what I was getting docked for literally 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's only gotten worse.
Right. And I tend to agree. I think this sport will just be an ever changing, ever fluid, and ever evolving. We may even, it's like fashion trends too, like something that was in 20 years ago circles back around, and that could very well be the case, So
and you might, honestly, I think you're very right on that aspect, because if you looked at the early 90s when it was still about a lot of, aesthetics in bodybuilding, they still had the streamlined waist, the good conditioning, not overly conditioned, but with good size. And then late 90s was nothing but mass monster central, and that lasted for 10 plus years. And I think now we're kind of looping back around to the more conditioned aesthetic side of it. However, with that side of it comes the heavy use of drying agents, Winstrol, diuretics. I've seen a lot of people been like, oh yeah, I took a quarter or half a diazide, and I'm like, you're 100 pounds. Like, why? And the bikini competitors, these are bikini competitors taking diazide. Like, I'm sorry, but I can dry out fairly naturally without any of those. Like, you as a bikini competitor should be able to, but because of the division requirements now, everyone's pushing it to the limits and to the extremes, like every extreme they can.
I would again agree that it's going to continue to happen. So regardless of whether, no matter how many classifications that you create to try and fix a problem, you'd have to assume that there's some conscious awareness from the governing bodies that you're not really fixing the problem. You're just finding more ways to include people, right, at extreme categories, right? Yeah, you're going to include everybody because eventually you're going to have really good looking marketable individuals that don't fit into a particular category. You start to have a desire or a different desire from the public for certain looks, right? As they kind of realize that they can't make, or that there's no way they could ever be a mass monster. Then you create a new category. It's like, well, maybe I can compete in this category. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you can't compete in that category because the people in that category are also like, are insane.
For that category. Yeah.
Right. And so you're just going to continue to create categories to fit people in, right? And continue to highlight the sport. Like I said, I don't think that everybody can just go compete, but as long as you start to create new categories, you continue interest, right, in the sport for people who would like a particular look. And then you just take the look to the extreme, and maybe that's true. Right. Exactly.
That's so then right now too, is because like I said, I refuse to compete in women's physique anymore, but I'm also on the realm of possibly doing wellness, and everyone's like, oh no, big for wellness, but you should do figure. And then you look at the figure girls, and I don't want to do figure because that's clearly still a lot of PEDs, PEDs. Yeah.
So then so there are a lot of, so when you're at these kind of super physiological levels, let's say of testosterone, and let's say keeping it in the perspective of a female athlete, there are issues that go on with you physiologically. So the heart, the liver, the kidneys, like there are a lot of different things going on. You said it a second ago, and I wanted to kind of get into it as well, which was the emotional side of everything. So can you speak to some of the things that you've either experienced or you've seen other people go through as far as what happens to you, regardless of whether or not you're, using PEDs, right? Whenever you get into the sport, and then maybe the difference between when you get into the sport and then when you start using PEDs, and how those things kind of, result in a particular emotional state.
I always made a joke that bodybuilding was for the head cases, because I mean, you have to be some kind of just distraught to want to do some of the extremes that comes with bodybuilding. And unfortunately, with those extremes, it takes a huge mental toll, because I am a very extreme person. If I'm going to do something, it's going to all out do something. And if I'm not like succeeding in that realm, then I'm completely like shut down by it. And so then you get in that realm of just depression, because especially post-show, that's where a lot of people fall victim to. Post-show, you're lost. You just finished the show. You don't know if you should keep dieting or if you should grow, whether you're on PEDs or whether you should start them or come off of them. It's just one mental block, because there's always that mindset, especially for competitors, of what's next, because we're always looking for more. And even with PEDs, it makes it that much worse, because it's just you're adding so much to your body, and you're putting so much into one thing. And then once that thing is gone, aka the competition or the sport, you're left like with a great physique, but obviously lines fade over time when you start eating. And then that's even more depressing, because you looked like, this Greek statue for so long that everyone idolized and worshiped in the gym. And then, 2 months later, you've put back on that 20 pounds that you lost at the beginning of prep, and you just like every other, buff Joe Schmo in the gym. And that also takes a big mental fortitude. It's not for the weak, that's for sure. Bodybuilding mentally it creates also what I've noticed is eating disorders. A lot of bodybuilders come out with full-on eating disorders because, you dieted and you looked great, and so you eat anything bad and you feel guilty for it. So then you don't want to eat bad, and you starve yourself more calories, or you do the exact opposite, and like what I did, and you binge eat because you think you deserve all of the calories in the world, and suddenly you have edema in your ankles and you can't wear shoes. And
and I would love to have a whole other conversation on that. The whole ED issue coming out of bodybuilding post show. That's a whole another rabbit hole, a whole another episode that I would love to talk about as well, because it's just absurd these days.
And I just now, after 6 years, have gotten in a comfortable relationship with food because of bodybuilding. Before bodybuilding, I didn't view any sort of relationship with food. I just ate, that was it. Now I am so worried about eating every 2 to 3 hours. I'm so worried about what I'm eating. I'm so concerned. Oh, well, if I miss a meal, I'm going to have to eat double the calories or I'm going to lose weight. Like, it just becomes a constant thought in your brain, what you are and are not putting into your body, even without a show. 5 years later, it's still a constant thought. And that's something you either get past it or you let it ultimately control you. And I've seen it take control of a lot of people, and their life is structured dieting and they don't know anything besides that. And then there's also people that binge eat and gain 50 pounds plus show and end up having health issues because of it.
Yeah, there's a lot with that. So even then, a lot of the research that I've done has been around appetite. And one big thing I've looked at would just be not necessarily bodybuilders, but just female athletes in general, where you'd have kind of that binge purge. And we like to think of purge as, self-induced vomiting and things like that. But you can purge in several different ways, right? And so it tends to be kind of like you suggested, you would binge eat. Then you feel that shame and guilt because of the binge eating that you did. And then you find some way in which you would purge, and then it just becomes this continuous cycle of developing the eating disorder itself. And that seems to be pretty, prominent in your female competitors, right? And you said that you were struggling, or even to this day, right, to have a positive relationship, I guess, with food. And so would you say that you felt some of those similar feelings as far as like getting off of your diet? Was it that obsessive, I guess, where you'd feel the shame or guilt is usually what you would feel?
Absolutely. It got to a point where I would finish a show. And I remember at one point, my coach Alex had to tell me 3 weeks post show that I was still eating too little because I was so afraid at one point. And this was obviously at the very beginning when I started my preps with him. He's like, you're still eating what I gave you in peak week. He's like, that's not even enough to feed a 10-year-old boy. He's like, you need to eat more. And I was so worried about eating more. I didn't realize I was actually starving myself in the process. Ended up losing a lot of weight. And then whenever I came out of it, it was the exact opposite effect is, I'd lost all of this weight. Well, I need to put it all back on. And I went from 139 to, I want to say 172 in a matter of 3 months. I put on 40 pounds, just stuffing my face because I was like, now I need to be in a surplus and, make what I had lost. And that's terrible.
The extremes of both ends there, right? And obviously, like you said, the post-show dieting is where you see a lot of that stuff happening, where you just put on the insane weight. So that, even then, like I said, you said, or whenever your coach is telling you, your coach, Alex, right? So, you have, somebody who is a good coach, and then somebody who is a high level competitor like yourself. And so even whenever we talked about coaching issues earlier, but even when you do have a good coach, there still seems to be that obsession, right? That goes along with it. And why do you think that happens? Even though your coach is telling you, what's the barrier, I guess?
It's more of fear. It's not that because obviously I trust Alex with my life. I mean, he's been doing my dieting for 5 years and he's done an immaculate job with all of it. Mm-hmm. But it's just that fear of, I want to look this way because of, I want to maintain being more shredded, or I want to be a little bit fuller. Mm-hmm. And it got to a point where I would do the exact opposite of what he would be leading me to do. And then I would be reaping the unfortunate effects of that said diet, because there was one time he told me to slow down on eating a whole bunch of sodium and Mexican food after a show. And the very next day, my ankles were so swollen, I could not drive. I could not put on shoes. I could not walk. And he's like, that's why. He's like, the other issue with that is that causes a lot of heart issues if you keep that up, which rightfully so. He was just concerned for my health, but I was, I was more worried about, saturating myself in salt and queso.
So do you think that sometimes there would be, whether or not the athlete is conscious of this or not, do you think there's a difference between the athlete's, I guess, goal and the coach's goal? So you would have Alex that would be doing your programming and everything with a specific goal in mind of helping you get to a particular look on stage. Whereas it's harder for the athlete, let's say, and you in this instance, to follow it, because although you kind of have the long-term goal of competing at a certain level on stage, leading up to that, you also want to maintain a particular look, and whether you're aware of it or not, you're making decisions in the short term that are contradictory to what the coach is.
Yes. Unfortunately, that is an exact situation I've had to learn from. And it came down to, Ashlynn, you need to stop taking estrogen blockers, and you need to give your body that physiological break. So whenever you reintroduce them later on at different prep, your body actually responds to them. And I was like, no, I don't want to gain any estrogenic fat. I don't want to gain any now. So I continued to take them. And then lo and behold, in prep, I wasn't responding to any estrogen blockers because my body had been so used to them for so long. We ended up having to completely cancel all estrogen blockers out. And it took a lot longer for my body to readapt to that than it probably would have been just to stop taking them back then, before, when the prep ended, and then having to redo it 2 years later.
Yeah. You answered my follow-up question, which was, how hard was it to actually stop doing some of those things?
Very hard. Because I mean, you like looking that way. I mean, you worked hard to look that way. And so in my mind, it's like, why can't I healthily maintain this? Like, if I'm healthily maintaining it now, so why couldn't I just prolong it? Not realizing in the same breath, I'm doing a lot more physiological damage and harm because I'm suppressing it that much further. And it's still lessons to be learned, but unfortunately now I see people experiencing those same unfortunate lessons, and not because they didn't listen, it's just because they didn't have a good coach.
Mm-hmm. So Garrett, I know that you gotta get out of here, I think, right?
I will depart, but Austin and Ashlynn, you guys will continue.
Yep. If you've got some more time, Ashlynn, I'd love to keep going.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course, I will depart quickly. Ashlynn, fantastic to meet you.
Great to talk to you. Yeah, good to meet you too.
I would love to have you back on in the future. And then I'm always here in North Texas as well. If you're ever in the Fort Worth area,
I'm actually in Dallas right now.
Well, there you go. Feel free to stop by my gym here in downtown Fort Worth if you're ever nearby Vigor Active, and then good workout in, something like that. But other than that, yeah, I'll sign off and let you guys continue on. We'll see you all.
All right, thanks, Garrett. Yeah. So this is really fascinating to me to kind of hear this perspective of it. So along with everything else that we've kind of already discussed, so one big thing that seems to be an issue to me is the unrealistic expectation of time it takes in order to get to a particular way, and how much maybe that ideology has kind of fostered so many issues. So I guess whenever you're training people, or let's say whenever you're coaching people, training people, working with people, what are their expectations for developing a physique similar to yours or other bodybuilders, or being a competitive physique, let's say?
Oh, they're expecting to, have very, very noticeable and extreme results in 1 month. I've had especially female clients, and I've gotten to a point now, whenever I take on a new client, I explain to them, I'm like, especially females, like, for the most part, realistically, even with 100% diet changes, if it's someone brand new coming into it, especially dieting and training in general, it's going to take about 2 to 3 months before you see really anything visually, because it's going to take 2 to 3 months for it to work internally. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, you have to work on yourself, especially if it's reversing a lot of years of bad dieting and bad nutrition. It's going to take some time to reverse the insides before you can start seeing that on the outside. And I know instant gratification because of social media is at an all-time high. And that's one thing that sucks with coaching, is because you can give them the best nutritional guidance, the best advice. You could probably hold their hand and prep all of their meals and spoon feed them. But if they're not seeing results from that first month, they start to kind of get down on it and don't want to do it because, well, so-and-so looks like this and so-and-so looks like that. And like, well, so-and-so has probably also been training for 7 years and is probably taking something if you look at it correctly too. And that's the other illusion, is social media has kind of blinded people to the aspect of PEDs. And you have a lot of people that aren't really claiming the truth. So it's putting a lot of false ideologies in people's heads about what is actually naturally attainable. And then it also comes down to epigenetics too. I mean, genetics play a huge role, as well as knowledge and physiology and training. I mean, every aspect of bodybuilding has to be very well monitored and very meticulously tuned. And that's why I was saying is it's not for the weak. It's almost for like the mentally insane, because no one sane wants to spend that much time counting how many grams of protein they're eating in a day, or how many calories they're burning in a resting point. No one wants to do that.
So I would call it more of a kind of a complex web. So you have bodybuilding in the middle, and there's just a bunch of different things that exist within this big web that is bodybuilding. And the things that you suggest, you have your genetics, your diet, your training, or your previous experience, right? All the coaching that you would have to go through. So you have to include a lot of these things in order to become a successful bodybuilder. And you can't just have some guy off the street come in ready to embrace all the different, kind of complex pieces of that web, but they still want the same results as though they had kind of or taken on all those different complex pieces. But I think even with that, it seems, or I guess it seems to me that people are more unrealistic about what their current status is as well. And so coming in off the street and wanting to look like a particular person, I think that they're just really not perceiving themselves as though they are as where they actually are and what they need to be doing. And even like you said, you could have the best training, people provide you with the meals. The best training is the one that does right by the person's overall well-being and kind of attainment of the particular goal.
Exactly.
At some point. But I think that that's where the kind of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's where maybe people are drawing the line, where I'm not necessarily, because of the time aspect of all this, I'm not necessarily concerned about my long-term success. I really like for it to just do what you need to do to me right now and let me get there as quickly as possible. And we can figure out everything else after the fact. And then, like you said, if it doesn't come quick enough, well, maybe I'll find a different strategy or a different coach, or I'll just stop altogether, gain all the weight back that I'd already lost. And then you kind of start with plan B, but maybe with a new coach who's more likely to give you what you want, not what you would need.
Yes, exactly. And then that is people, because they aren't seeing those results right off the bat with one coach. You'll have people, and I call them the coach hoppers, and they'll just, every month they have a new coach and they're bouncing around like this on a domino board. And I've had clients who, they did their fair share of coach bouncing, and then 6 months later have come back and are groveling because they realized like pretty much every coach gives you the same information, but it's also up to the client to follow that information. And that's another issue is, they can bounce from coach to coach, but if they still aren't following it directly like they should or doing as they should, nothing's going to save them.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, you actually have to do the thing the coach is telling you to do. Yeah. If the 5 coaches tell you the same thing and you're still not doing well, then maybe it's not that, it's not necessarily the coach, of course. And so then, how much do you think that time aspect contributes to the issues you see with bodybuilding with just PED use and then just the extreme of the sport itself, right? Like, I want to be big now. What do I have to do?
Oh man, I see a lot of people, especially younger kids, who will just start taking gear thinking this is the way, this is what they need to do. And they don't understand why they're having all of these hormonal issues. I've legit had conversations with people about, I'm having this effect and this symptom and this is happening to me. I'm like, okay, well, let's go over your cycle. And they tell me the things that they're taking or the amounts. And I'm like, there's your first issue.
Yeah.
Like that in itself, like listening to and a lot of people, because they don't know, or they just want to do what everyone else is doing because that's how they got the way they look. They're just biting the bullet. And, I've seen 19-year-old kids come around taking 600 to 700 mgs a test, completely unnecessary for that age. Like,
yeah, man.
Same way, like I said, you have females that, running Mastron, they're running Trend just so they can be lean, and then wondering why they go through a drive-through and get called sir. Yeah.
No, for sure. I will say that I would definitely agree that it's definitely more of the younger kids that are kind of the, what do I need to do? And just throwing things in the cocktail and taking it or putting it in and then seeing what happens. But it's gotta be hard, but I would imagine it is difficult to be a kid and want to look a particular way, want to compete at a high level, and have to say, if I do this the right way, this is going to take years, right? So you started our training at what year?
I was like intensely training in the gym in 2014, and I did my first show in 2016.
Right. And so then it took you all the way up, and it took you 4 years, right? And you competed at a high level. I mean, you have great genetics, like you're not a pro for no reason, right? You put all the pieces in that complex web together, and just like kind of stated earlier, the highest degree of competitors are all the ones that are most serious about their sports in all aspects.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
They don't miss a lot of those different pieces. Now, whenever you're a kid and you have to hear that, okay, yeah, that's great, you can compete and that's awesome, and I want you to compete and I'll be your coach, but this is going to be a long-term process. You're probably not going to end up being, if you ever end up being anything and stick with this sport, because it is for the mentally insane, let's say, or use your words there, it is for the mentally insane there. Then if you stick with it, it's going to take you that many years. So there's your plan. You get ready for the long haul. That's probably hard to hear for people who may not even be that interested in bodybuilding, but just are interested in looking a particular way.
Yeah,
so
or
rather than
following behind it.
So rather than wanting to actually just say, okay, well, I want to, do it the right way because I want to be an all around great competitor. Well, really, I just wanted to look like everybody that I kind of idolize on social media or wherever I see them. And now I want to be there as soon as possible. I don't like that 4-year plan. So I'm going to go ahead and accelerate that to X degree. Right.
To 6 months or less. Yeah. That's been a lot of the issue too, with a lot of newer competitors, is just speeding the train along rather than doing the work and, taking the time.
Yeah. So then you being a coach and kind of with everywhere that, everything that you've gone through up to this point, what kind of information or strategies and things do you preach to some of the people that you currently work with now? How do you set up people for success? How, I guess, receptive are they to hearing some of your strategy, right? And then kind of what goes on in your world now as you train?
My big thing is 100% transparency and honesty between clients and coaches. Obviously we're dealing with diet and physiological matters. So, asking questions like, how many times are you peeing a day? How is your bowel movements? Like, for me as a coach, those are very typical questions. And I know, like, as, coming in as a new client, that can be kind of like off-putting, like, why do they want me to know, or why do they want to know the information? But honestly, I feel like if you're going to be a good coach, those are questions you need to ask. You need to ask how your client is feeling. Like, you need to know how their training is going, how their energy levels are, especially if you're manipulating their diet. And that's the one thing that I always preach for the most, like, is just give me complete transparency and honesty.
Are they pretty receptive of that? And when you kind of hash out all the kind of preliminary information, how do most people feel? Do they continue to work with you, or did they fall off, or how does it work usually?
For the most part, as long as I come at them very directly and honestly, I have a client that's been with me for nearly 3 years, and, she does fantastic, and she listens to what I say, and, we have complete honesty and, openness with each other. And then I have some clients who they want me to give them the diet that they want, for lack of better terms, not the diet that they need. And so the second I'm combative in that nature, and then like, well, this is why I'm doing things the way I am, some are completely turned off by it, and they completely negate the idea of coaching or working with me.
Yeah. And I would, of course, knowing you and everything, your integrity is phenomenal. And I would imagine that, right, whenever you have the people who are more combative with the strategies that you want to employ, that there's, again, knowing you, that there's not going to be much give on your end. Right. Like, yeah, this is what you're going to do. Well, then if not, for lack of better words, then sorry, but F you. And you're not really probably I'm sorry, but I can't be a part of that.
I'm the same way, because like I'm a no bullshit, no excuses type of person. 1 second.
Yeah, you're good. For sure. And
Yeah. And, you know, I have clients that are like, oh, well, I had this come up and I had this come up and, you know, I'm sorry, I couldn't do this. And I'm like, you know, some of these are competitors too. And I'm like, you want to compete, but you have an excuse for why you can't do what you need to do as a competitor.
Yes.
Like I don't, and I have actually dropped clients for that, like middle of prep, like, oh, you don't want to send me check-ins weekly and you can't tell me like that you're following your diet plan and I can't even hear like that. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it works. I will not work with you.
For sure. I would say it's eventually just not going to be or work out. The unfortunate thing is kind of like we discussed earlier is that you have the people who are, you give me the diet that I want, not the diet that I need. And then as a, you know, a good coach, you'd say, well, no, it's not really how this works, but there's probably a high prevalence of people that are saying, yeah, sure, you know, to make the money and be that competitive coach, right, and whatnot. And, you know, like I said, I do understand the monetary need or the need to be a coach and make money and everything like that. Of course, I would say that it shouldn't come at the expense of the athlete or by any means, right, if they're not doing something correctly. But yeah,